Welcome, everyone. I say it's lovely to see everybody, but almost everybody has their camera switched off, which I don't blame you at all. But once our friends from SHOAL have started talking, if any of you are feeling brave and want to switch your camera on, it's always nice for the speaker to be talking to a set of faces rather than a set of names. But of course, there's no obligation to do so. It's just nice if you're feeling brave. I'm John. I'm the Director of Conservation Optimism. It is lovely to welcome you all today. We've still got people coming in, so it's as people come in, it's lovely to see you. I'm going to say a few words about conservation optimism in case you're new to this. Then I'm going to hand over to others who can say much more interesting things. But we're delighted today to welcome our friends from SHOAL. We've got Michael and Georgie here. Mike couldn't make it at the last minute, so he sends his apologies. But we're delighted to see Michael and Georgie, and it's going to be another amazing webinar. All of these webinars this year, in fact, in previous years, have been amazing, so we're looking forward to another good one. Conservation optimism was set up in response to this. It was set up in 2016, but this is from almost exactly a year ago, and the challenge persists. Some of the most common challenges we face are conservation burnout, psychological safety, and ecological grief amongst both young and established conservation professionals. We work in an atmosphere, in a framing of crisis and emergency. We can do long talks about why people use that language and the actual impact that it has. But if for any of us who are engaged with the conservation world day in and day out, living under that framework can be overwhelming. It can cause anxiety and ecological grief, as our friend in Canada said here. Particularly a key audience for younger people as well. Anybody who's engaged with this is a conservationist in our book. And of course, younger audiences are automatically engaged with what's going on in the world. It's their future. So we have a particular focus on anybody who calls themselves a conservationist, anybody who's engaged in what's going on in the environmental world. And we try and counter this. Our role is to support, to empower where we can, and to enable conservationists in the broadest sense around the globe by sharing hope, which we do on a weekly and very regular basis, and building capacity and community, which is very much what this webinar is about. We share hope through our social media, through our blogs. We tell stories of amazing people and amazing projects. We enable by bringing people together. We build community, and hope we encourage people to work together to share lessons learned and skills developed and build capacity. And that's what these webinars feed into. Our summit last year, at which pretty sure Georgie was there, lots of organizations came and did an amazing job, was labeled empowering, enabling, and embracing, and that's pretty much our motto. This is my last slide. This is our what we call Conservation Now. It's the network of optimists worldwide. It's a community of over 200 now conservation organizations around the world. We share an ethos that the power of optimism and hope is vital to our success. But we also lean on each other, we support each other, and when we have learned lessons and developed skills that are useful, we try and pass them on and share them. That's really what these webinars are for, and we're delighted to hear from SHOAL today. I'm going to pass over to Rashu, who's our community manager, sitting in Kathmandu, who can introduce our guests today. I hope we all have a fantastic time. Stick around, there'll be a Q&A at the end. And thank you very much for coming today. Rashu, over to you.
Thanks, John. Hello, everyone. Welcome again. Before we begin, I would like to quickly introduce myself and our team. While I do that, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box. I'm Reshu Basyal, as John has already said. So I am community manager within the community team of Conservation Optimism. And along with John and I, we have today Holly, and I can also see Terita. Freshwater are at the sharp end of Earth's biodiversity crisis, and SHOAL is working tirelessly to address this issue. In today's webinar entitled How to Solve the Global Freshwater Fish Crisis, Michael and Georgie will share more about SHOAL and their 1000 Fishes initiative. Michael has worked across a range of communications roles, including as a journalist in Tanzania and marketing manager. He joined SHOAL in 2020 and enjoys the challenge of drawing attention to freshwater species. Georgie is a graduate in marine biology and coastal ecology and has worked as a seagrass project assistant and researcher for the BBC Natural History unit. She is a freelance underwater photographer, filmmaker, and science communicator with a deep-seated obsession for all things fish. I can't wait to hear more from Michael and Georgie. But before we begin, a quick note on housekeeping. So as you are already aware that this webinar is being recorded, please mute yourself and turn your video off, at least during the webinar session, to avoid distractions. If you have questions, which I encourage you to have, please put them in the chat box, and there will be around 10 to 15 minutes Q&A session at the end. All right, over to you, Michael and Georgie.
Great, thank you, Rashi. Thank you, John, for those introductions. I'll just share the presentation and we'll get started.
Fantastic.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Georgie. Take it away.
Yeah, brilliant. So first of all, thank you so much, Conservation Optimism, for inviting us. It's really lovely to feel that shared sentiment of optimism. And I think hopefully you'll come away feeling inspired, but I think it really is a shared sentiment between SHOAL and conservation optimism. And we're really hoping to be solutions focused and not just continuously describe the nature of how terrible things are all of the time, but focus on what we can actually do. And so that's what we'll be talking to you about today. It's quite an ambitious title, How to Solve the Global Freshwater Fishes Crisis. But hopefully you'll feel a bit more informed about what kind of actionable steps can happen and what partnerships can build to create meaningful conservation action on the ground for these fishes. Fab. So the team have already done a really lovely job of introducing us, but I thought I'd just quickly introduce myself. I've had a fairly eclectic background in studying marine environments and particularly fishes. I've been obsessed with fish since I could perceive the concept of a fish. And I've also worked in wildlife filmmaking for the BBC. So I've had a background in really trying to communicate conservation challenges as well as study them. And I came across SHOAL when I was working for the BBC, and I was recruited onto an episode of Attenborough's Asia to try and get more fish stories into the episode. And I found SHOAL and I went to my producer and I said, yeah, I really think we should get freshwater fish in the programme, because usually freshwater fish being eaten rather than behavioural stories being told. And that wasn't met with the most excitement. So I kept SHOAL in my back pocket and I hoped one day to work with them some more. And when my contract ended at the BBC, this position came up. So I was very keen to start working with like-minded fish fanatics, and here I am today. So really happy to be talking to you, and my email's on the screen should you wish to get in touch in the future.
Thanks, Georgie. And my name is Michael Edmondstone, one of two Michaels and a team now of 6 at SHOAL, which can sometimes get confusing. My background isn't in conservation per se or environmentalism per se. Through my 20s, I worked in marketing and journalism. And then when I sort of reached my 30s, I was very keen to pivot into the environmental sector, where I felt I'd be much better able to make a positive difference to some of the challenges facing the world. And I was very keen to pursue this opportunity at SHOAL because it's hugely ambitious. It's a very outward focused initiative, and SHOAL started in 2019. So when I joined in 2020, it was really an opportunity to get in at the ground floor and sort of grow and develop as the organization grew and developed as well.
So we just wanted to start off the conversation really by working out what people's relationships and feelings are towards fish. It can help us pitch for the rest of the way that we approach the rest of the talk. But it would just be really interesting. If anyone wants to talk, please do. If not, please feel free to pop in the chat your kind of relationship to fish. Are you someone that studies them? Have you ever kept them as pets? Do you go fishing? It'll be really interesting to see what's brought you to this webinar today. John's eloquently described the experience of fish in the chat. I think we can just stop there. I think that's summarized everything we could say. And if you're watching this later and not watching this live, I hope that it can maybe just give you a moment to kind of reflect on any interactions or ways in which you've been inspired or interested in fish, and what might have led you here.
Would
Favorite
it be worth reading the chats out so that people who joined after will be able to hear what's being said as well?
Yeah, so I'm just waiting for a few answers to come in. So Andrew said, I've been a keen fish keeper, freshwater and marine for around 30 years. Incredible. Favorite food? We have from Alina, and seen people keeping fish as pets from Reshu. And Leona said, worked in fisheries as an IT project manager and am a biodiversity enthusiast. Love watching them and tide pooling as a kid. Yeah, fantastic. I think a lot of people have either through cuisine or through fish keeping or observing other people, or I'm sure many people have a fanatical fisherman in their life. I know I certainly do. Interested in freshwater species and conservation from Sabina, and Kate said studied them in uni. So we've got a nice mix of people who have dabbled in consuming them or studying them and observing them. Great, great. Fab. Do feel free to keep popping things in the chat. We'll move on, but I will keep an eye out. So do feel free to continue that. It's always nice to learn more about who we're talking to. And so yeah, I just wanted to summarize the talk that we're giving, and we've kind of divided it into two sections. So the first section is why fish? Why are we working on fish and why are we targeting them? And the second part of that is who is affected by freshwater fish decline and conservation. And Mike, I think there's an animation. So there we go. So, and then the next part is a solution. So we have boldly named our title, How to Solve the Freshwater Fish Conservation Crisis. But the solution really is something that we want to focus on as part of this talk. And we'll be viewing that through the lens of how SHOAL works and what we're doing as part of our 1000 Fishes initiative. So our first section is why fish, and this is a species of killifish from Tanzania. This is a very popular aquarium hobby fish. The genus is Nothobranchius, and we're actually working now in Tanzania with a brilliant partner, Dr. David Alila, through some work with the Rufford Foundation, and they are working to build on a big research project of mapping these species and then putting in community-focused conservation action. So that's a really exciting species and hopefully a familiar one to many of you. It's certainly, I'm quite biased, it's one of my favourite fish species, so that's why I put it in there to kickstart while we're talking about fish. So next slide, please, Michael. Yeah, so I wanted to ask another question as well. This is really to just get our minds into a place of where our perceptions are at. And I would really love to hear from anyone in the chat or otherwise, what kind of comes to your mind when you think about fisheries, not specifically fish, but fisheries, the act of catching fish, the industry of catching fish. What comes to your mind? Please feel free to put that in the chat. I've also had a really lovely comment from Tim talking about being inspired by watching Cousteau films as a youngster and having lots of scuba diving experience, but little about freshwater fish. But campaigns locally for sustainable living and need to stop eating sea fish. Okay, yeah, that's a really nice overview from Tim. I think it's really hard sometimes to make those changes, especially long term. But working locally, I think, is a really empowering way to feel like you're making tangible difference. Okay, Andrew said about fisheries overharvesting, intensive fish farming, and poor animal welfare. Leona says very difficult working environments, population declines, and more effort required. Okay. So please do keep putting any more answers you have in the chat because I can feed them into what I'm saying. So there's no sort of time limit on these things, but I'll ask Michael to move to the next slide. So something that I have certainly perceived, and as someone who has studied marine biology instead of freshwater biology, is that when we talk about fishes and fisheries, and this is the thing that came up certainly for me when I Googled fisheries, is that most of these images, if not all of them, if I'm mistaken, are marine focused. And we think of fish and fisheries, we generally perceive marine environments. However, your very insightful comments did not mention marine. They mentioned more about broader scale problems within fisheries, which perhaps really highlights the need for conservation optimism's work in that we're burdened by all of these horrific things that come to mind when we think of certain industries. But yeah, fish and fisheries generally has a marine kind of tilt. And actually the third suggestion there is the ocean instead of potentially fresh water. So Mike, if I could ask you to go to the next slide. But there's some really powerful statistics around this in that actually work from WorldFish has shown, and the FAO has shown that over 50% of the world's fisheries are employing women, not just for capture, but for post-processing and business management. And they're often, and in fact, they're more commonly from freshwater environments instead of marine. So there's a real perception shift needed for us to work in areas where actually the most amount of fishing is occurring worldwide.
So a lot of your replies to the question, what you think about when you think about fisheries, they sounded very well tuned in and educated about the situation. But when we give this presentation to certain other groups of people who may know less about the sector, they often find it very surprising that actually, if you take estuaries into account as well, more than 50% of global fish production is from freshwater systems or those strongly linked to rivers, which it seems surprising. Obviously, the planet is the ocean is so large in respect to the amount of fresh water there is, but more than 40% of the global fish production comes from completely freshwater systems, and as I say, with estuaries involved as well, more than 50% comes from them. So potentially the people on this call are a little bit more, maybe a bit more knowledgeable, judging by some of those replies, but some people find that quite a surprising figure. In the same way that it's also potentially quite surprising that although only 1%, actually probably slightly less than 1% of the Earth's surface is fresh water, there's actually the majority of all fish species come from fresh water. So again, some people find that a very surprising figure. I certainly did when I first started at SHOAL, although obviously people in the know, they've heard that figure before, but it's potentially quite a surprising statistic. And some more figures here that show the extent of the kind of freshwater biodiversity crisis. More than 35% of wetlands have been lost in the last 55 years or so, which is 3 times more than rainforests, forests worldwide, but you don't hear them getting the same amount of kind of media attention. Often you hear about the number of football pitches of the rainforest being lost every minute, but you don't tend to hear so much about wetlands. And part of that is a sort of a communications issue that freshwaters have historically had. Over the past 5 decades, 80 freshwater species have been lost, which compared with other taxonomic groups is very high. And this loss is twice as fast as equivalents in marine or terrestrial environments. So the crisis is very pronounced. And from the nearly 19,000 freshwater fish species that have been described on the IUCN Red List of threatened species, more than 3,000 of them are classified as threatened, and 2,500, just over 2,500 classified as data deficient. And from this data deficient number, the chances are quite high that a good sizable percentage, probably a majority of these species would also be threatened. Part of the reason that they're threatened is often that they have very small ranges, very small populations. So it sort of stands to reason that they're quite likely to be threatened as well. So a very high percentage of these fishes are threatened. Perhaps up to a third of all freshwater fish threatened with extinction. So they compete with amphibians as the most threatened taxonomic group, way more threatened than mammals or reptiles.
And this was sort of came to a head in this sort of 10-year project that the IUCN and many other scientists globally had been working on to quantify the level of freshwater fauna threatened with extinction, and the figures came out at around a quarter, and this was for decapods, so crabs and lobsters, odonates, which are damselflies and dragonflies, freshwater fish as well, amphibians, and around 26% were noted as threatened for fish in freshwater environments. I flagged this because I don't want to spend a huge amount of time on the presentation going through the extents of loss and threats, because that's not really the focus of what we want to leave you with. However, this paper is really a kind of pinnacle in highlighting the nature of why SHOAL exists. So I did want to raise it. And if you want to read more about that and have more hard figures on that, I really recommend checking out that paper. So to summarize why we're focusing on fish and freshwater, really it can be put into 3 categories. We've got a rapid loss of freshwater species and habitats, paired with an underestimated dependence of freshwater globally, as I was saying, about freshwater fisheries being vastly underestimated. I also found a figure recently that suggests that the global revenue for inland fisheries actually exceeds that of things like Starbucks and Netflix. But the investment in freshwater fisheries and freshwater inland fisheries, as you can imagine, is much less than Starbucks or Netflix. And then there's a lack of conservation funding, knowledge, capacity. Synchronicity Earth, one of our host organisations, they shared a really insightful study recently about how most conservation funding goes to least concerned species, and some of the larger mammalian megafauna do tend to take up a lot of that conservation funding. There's a lack of capacity for people to feel like they know how to study these environments and these species, as well as a lack of resources to do so. So those are like the 3 horsefish of the apocalypse, I guess, that we're trying to tackle. And so from that, Mike, if you could pop over to the next slide. SHOAL has created its 3 sort of pillars of how we work. So we've got act and acting rather than continuously sort of getting stuck on the taxonomy of cichlids in X Lake, to try and actually create action that can spark meaningful and long-term conservation action. And that's kind of sort of formed the basis of our 1,000 Fishes initiative, which we'll go into. But inspire is another one, and that's a big part of what we do, because while it's less tangible and it's very difficult to be able to give metrics on how you may have inspired or how you've created an education program, there is a public, like a PR crisis and public perception crisis with freshwater fish. So SHOAL, as well as working on kind of quantifiable conservation action, really wants to inspire people to get excited about freshwater fish, freshwater systems generally, and then mobilizing, empowering the people on the ground who know those systems and those species the best to be able to work on the ground and do something about the species that they care about.
So obviously this is a conservation optimism webinar, not a conservation kind of feeling dismayed webinar. So it's all about solutions, as Georgie says. It's solutions focused, and this is about how we can turn back the tide on freshwater extinctions. So the way SHOAL is set up is in a similar way to conservation optimism. John mentioned the Conservation Now community. It's very much about building a network, building a community, building a partnership of partners who are working towards the same goal. So we're very fortunate to be hosted by two fantastic organizations, one in the UK called Synchronicity Earth that many of you may have come across already. Their whole sort of modus operandi is to catalyze urgent action for the overlooked and underfunded species around the world. So SHOAL is a very good fit for that because freshwater fishes, even among the sort of overlooked and underfunded species, freshwater fishes feature very highly sort of on that list. And Rewild in the States, a very impactful, influential charity in their own right. So they're the host partners, and we work very closely with lots of strategic partners, conservation optimism being one of them. And these strategic partners contribute to the SHOAL partnership in lots of different ways, including strategizing, obviously, outreach, awareness raising, capacity building, mentoring, in situ and ex situ conservation support, funding support, technical advice. So being a small team of now 6 people, six members of staff, we are unable to do a huge amount of the conservation work ourselves, but having this strong partnership of fantastic organizations and individuals all swimming together really enables us to move the needle and do some really impactful work. Alongside the strategic partners are the local action partners, and they're the individuals, organizations on the ground that SHOAL supports. They accelerate the conservation action for the freshwater fishes, and we have a sort of organizational health assessment to establish whether the organization is sort of fit for purpose, and more often than not they are, and they write a proposal. And SHOAL's a big part of SHOAL's work is to help deliver capacity support, part of the sort of the mobilize strategic pillar, delivering capacity support, and we bring in the funding and then channel out the funding to these impactful local action partners. So the clue is in the name. The idea of SHOAL was always very much a partnership, like a shoal of fish. The strength relies in the number of individual fishes swimming together as part of a partnership, as part of a community. So partnership, inclusion, and neutrality, these are real sort of buzzwords that the organization sort of lives by. In the strategic partners, we include IUCN freshwater groups, the Freshwater Fish Specialist Group, Species Survival Commission, and you can see some of these logos at the bottom of the screen here, Conservation Optimism being one. Lots of fantastic funders and lots of brilliant conservation organizations in their own right who really work very collaboratively with us to move the needle. Currently, at the last count, there are 35 strategic partners and 20 local action partners currently dotted around, well, all 5 continents. We've forged 2 new alliances and currently have conservation action mobilized for more than 200 species. So we'll come on to the 1,000 fishes strategy soon, but we've already mobilized conservation action for 200 of those species. So we're sort of a fifth of the way towards this 10-year goal. And it's worth mentioning that one of the real joys of working in this space, in the freshwater space in particular, is the collaborative nature of it. Everyone who works in the freshwater conservation space recognizes that due to the historical neglect, it's really important that organizations work well together to help create meaningful change. Whereas in sometimes the marine world or the terrestrial worlds, it can be a lot more sort of competitive between organizations looking for funding. So it's really rewarding being part of this network where everybody's very collaborative to find a common cause. This is a quote from Mike Bolzer that really sort of sums up why it's such a fantastic focus. So freshwater fish conservation is an easy access point for helping some of the world's most vulnerable species and communities. So in freshwater fish conservation, because the species breed often fairly regularly, obviously much more regularly than a rhino, you can really boost numbers very, very quickly, and often for a relatively really small amount of funding, you can really save a lot of species. Oftentimes they might be in quite a small range. So, and there might also be quite a few species in that range. So if you put protective measures on that range, then you can really help a few species, for relatively much lower funding than a lot of the traditionally sort of sexy, charismatic species, particularly megafauna. And aside from the species, it's really helpful, beneficial to the communities, because all around the world, people have settled communities near fresh water for obvious reasons. It's a sort of source of fresh water and for food. And if you protect these species, you protect the wider ecosystem, and you're really helping safeguard the future for these communities that rely on the ecosystems and the species as well.
Yeah, just to build on what Michael was saying, Mike, our executive director, he came up with this recently, and I thought it was a really lovely way of framing it, in that when we've gone to approach freshwater systems, we often focus that through the lens of birds or mammals. And I say that as a birder. I love bird watching and I'm obsessed with birds. So no shade if you're a fellow bird fanatic. I am too. But for freshwater fish, if conservation historically had started working with those fish species that are key protein sources for millions around the world, actually we would have had a double kind of a double impact, because we wouldn't have only been working on those habitats for the mammals and the birds and the fish, which often slip through the cracks of habitat scale management, but we also would have been helping the communities that depend on them for their livelihoods and for nutrition. So that brings us on to our kind of key two initiatives that SHOAL is working on. And we have the 1000 Fishes initiative, which I will go into more detail about. And we also have our Inspire initiative that I mentioned about really trying to build up a sense of inspiration and excitement for freshwater. So I'll hand you back over to Michael, as he is our fantastic comms manager. Michael, do you want me to cover this slide? I forgot about
Yeah, you cover these two slides. Yeah, I think
fab. Sorry, I actually forgot I popped those in a bit last minute. So when I was looking at the BBC, I noticed a general lack of excitement for freshwater environments and fish. And that's really a product of what people have seen, so they know what they want. Public perception surveys around filmmaking and documentary making for wildlife show that people want to see lions, they want to see tigers, they want to see sharks, whales, turtles, dolphins. They are less likely to request any sort of media includes things like fish or fresh water, which I think is because they've not had it, so they don't know what they're missing. But there's a real role, I think, that comes into play with creating inspiration. And a big part of that is that habitat loss and destruction in terrestrial environments like forests is very tangible, right? We can see it, and we know just from looking at this image that something is wrong, something has changed, there's been destruction. But we don't have the same privilege with freshwater environments. For example, this photo, we don't know, but there could be the same level of habitat destruction, of degradation, of pollution happening in this environment, and we could still be enjoying it and not knowing. So there is a real role with working with our Inspire initiative for this cause, despite the fact that it's not always easy to know how best to approach it or how much of an impact you're having. But I would argue it's just as important as the work that we're doing that is more objective and quantifiable.
So what kind of work does SHOAL do? These two campaigns, these two initiatives that Georgie mentioned, Inspire and 1,000 Fishes. So very early in SHOAL's existence, it was recognized that a big reason that freshwater fishes have been neglected for so long is that the stories haven't been told. People only care about what they know about. If they can't see these species, if they don't know the stories about them, if they're not sort of amazed and inspired by them, then they're just not going to have the opportunity to care. So obviously they're not going to care, and they're not going to be saved. So Inspire is, as Georgie said, one of the key strategic pillars, and one of the methods that we use to help encourage people to care about these species is a number of different publications. So every year on March the 3rd, World Wildlife Day, we release the New Species Report, and that highlights the freshwater fish species that were described to science that preceding year. So some of you may be surprised to know that on average there's about 220 new fish species described, freshwater fish species described every year. It's quite a lot. You can understand why. A lot of rivers and lakes and ponds and caves and springs, sometimes they're in pretty inaccessible places, and also sometimes they just haven't been surveyed. So a couple of years ago there were quite a few species that were described from a lake in Switzerland that was from a species that was already known about, but through taxonomic work, through some really good work from taxonomists, it was realized that they weren't looking at one species, they were looking at maybe 8. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but it's quite a few different species. So, these taxonomists do really fantastic work, often with very little recognition. Without them, we wouldn't know about these new species. And some of them display really fantastic adaptations. So the front cover of New Species 2023, it's this blind cave fish that is found in China. It's got this crazy kind of horn-like structure coming out of its head. It's totally blind. There have been fishes that jump out of water to evade predators. Fishes that the sound that they make, they're these tiny little species called Daniela cerebrum, and they make a sound that's as loud as a jet engine. These clicks that they make. Fishes that have been used in research for medical purposes for humans. Another one that stands out is the species called the Wolverine pleco that has these quite cool kind of barbs on its fins that it uses in sparring for kind of territory and mating rights. And these stories really, they're optimistic stories. They're stories of conservation optimism. The media love to hear stories that aren't bogged down with doom and gloom. It's wonderful. These species are being found. They're often they're healthy. Sometimes often they're, of course, threatened. But it's really optimistic news stories that these species are being discovered, and with a lot of these interesting kind of physiological adaptations, the media really sort of jumps on it. So this is one of the ways that we help break out of our sort of conservation echo chamber and encourage people beyond the conservation sector to start paying attention to freshwater fishes. We talk about the sort of Jacques Cousteau moment is what we're really trying to work towards, where in the 50s, Jacques Cousteau dipped his mask under the water of the world's coral reefs and oceans and really brought to life, brought into people's living rooms, the fantastic, colorful, interesting, complex communities that live in coral reefs. And it is much harder to tell those stories with fresh water. Often the water can be quite turbid, the conditions can be quite difficult to film in. And Georgie knows very well herself from working in the natural history filmmaking sector. A lot of the time, producers just don't want to take the risk on freshwater fish. So you might watch a documentary about freshwater and see elephants and see bears eating salmon and see sort of hippos, but often you don't really see the stories of freshwater fishes. So that's what Inspire is trying to achieve. This report was released. The World's Forgotten Fishes was a sort of multilateral report that was released by, I think there was 17 high-profile conservation organizations signed onto it, including SHOAL, and it was led by WWF, and that was a really fantastic method of getting the plight of fishes into the mainstream media. It was very, very effective at getting sort of eyeballs on the issue and providing solutions as well. And one of the campaigns that we work on is this search for the lost fishes. There's a list of, I can't remember off the top of my head, 300 and or so species that haven't been declared extinct, but they haven't been recorded to science in at least 10 years. That's what makes them lost. And we are working with partners around the globe to try and find some of these fishes. So in 2021, I think it was, the Batman river loach was the first of our top 10 most wanted lost species that was rediscovered. And that picked up global media attention worldwide, partly because of the name Batman river loach and partly because Leonardo DiCaprio covered it on his Instagram, and it was picked up by the mainstream press and got a lot of attention, deserved attention, because it was a wonderful news story of this species that people had thought had gone extinct that was still eking out an existence in Turkey. And then the same team that rediscovered that last year, at the start of last year, they also rediscovered the leopard barbel in Turkey as well. And that was through working very closely with some fishermen who were keeping an eye out for this species. There'd been sort of accounts of people seeing it from time to time, but it had never been formally recorded to science, not for more than a decade. So that's really fantastic news. And the 1,000 Fishes publication as well. We'll come on to that more in the next few slides. So we just mentioned it just now, but the success story, this team from the Recep Tayyip Erdogan University in Turkey, Doctors Cüneyt Kaya and Minerva Oral, they rediscovered both the Batman river loach and the leopard barbel. And Cüneyt gave this quote: "There's nothing quite like the feeling of finding that a species that has been pushed to the brink of extinction is still hanging on despite the odds." And we're currently working on an expedition to the Sepik River in the depths of Papua New Guinea to try and find another species on the top 10 most wanted list, the spinach pipefish, and that's made possible by this generous grant from the Rufford Fund, Rufford organization.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, thanks.
So from the Inspire, that's our sort of one of two of our main initiatives, but the second really encompasses the rest of our work, and that is on 1,000 Fishes. And just before I joined SHOAL, the 1,000 Fishes blueprint was released, and it really sets a framework for how we can create conservation action for 1,000 of the world's most threatened freshwater fishes by 2035. Mike, if you could go on to the next slide, that'd be fab. So a big part of that work was doing research to attempt to make a sort of prioritization system, and that was based on the IUCN Red List, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It's sort of like a barometer of life, and it gives indications of extinction risk for species. It has its pitfalls and it's not exhaustive, but it was the best way that we could find to create a list of our priority species. So we included extinct in the wild, endangered, vulnerable, and critically endangered. And we worked out from there that approximately 12% were currently receiving conservation action. So Mike, if you could go to the next slide. This is just a quick slide to show the diversity of fishes that are on our priority fishes list. And our database is open access. So if you want to have access to that, it's on our website. And we're currently rehauling it and creating a more user-friendly relational database through Airtable. We now have a brilliant data officer, Grace, and she's working tirelessly to make that database even more accessible, but also populate it with more information about what conservation action is happening for those species. And for many of you that have kept fish before, I know some of you in the chat mentioned, we've got the denizens barb, which I'll move on to talking about as a success story. We've got the red-tailed shark minnow, we've got Gara species and rainbow fishes, also the leopard barbel. But these species are not just ones that are kept in the aquarium hobby. There are also ones that are key food fishes as well. So there's a real range within the priority fishes of the kinds of species, not just taxonomically, but in terms of our relationship to humans there.
Yeah, this slide really, sorry, Georgie, were you going?
Go for it.
This slide really shows the diversity of fishes in fresh waters, and you can see how they're really on a par with coral reefs. The colors and the adaptations and the shapes and sizes are really, really magnificent. So in the blueprint, in the 1,000 Fishes blueprint, we have highlighted 36 priority countries. As you can see, there's a really strong geographic spread. Not so much in Southwest America, but lots in North America, Brazil, obviously the Amazon, lots in Mexico, the Congo River Basin, lots in South Africa, Madagascar, Turkey, Greece, and the Mediterranean Basin, Australia, India, the Western Ghats in particular in India, parts of Russia, parts of China, lots of Southeast Asia, lots of Asia in general. You can really see that there's a lot of these species that are highly threatened, endangered, critically endangered, don't currently have any conservation attention for them, are in desperate need, and they're the areas that SHOAL is really gearing its focus.
And just to highlight, this is, to me, perhaps the most staggering revelation from that background work that we did for the blueprint, is that 86% of these priority fishes are range restricted, which means that they are, well, it's quite self-explanatory, but they're restricted to very small spatial areas. And while that works as a downfall in that single threats or stresses can be quite disproportionately problematic for them, it also means that we can work at a very small scale for not a lot of money to do really meaningful work for entire species at a time. And coming from a marine environment where you're trying to model, you know, planktonic dispersal of larvae across entire ocean systems to try and work on just one species, it's really profound to me that we can work on entire species, you know, just by potentially saving a single stretch of a pool or river. So that's a really, like, for me, I think that's quite an optimistic takeaway from the blueprint. And yeah, I mean, a lot of the time we think about things at habitat scale, but wetland conservation has often omitted the specific needs of freshwater species and specifically fish. So we really do need this species approach, and there's whole fields of work into why that is becoming increasingly important for wetlands conservation.
So just another couple of success stories here. Last year we were fortunate enough to get some funding through the IUCN Asian Species Action Partnership, or ASAP. We received some money funding to direct out to really impactful organizations that are doing some wonderful work across Asia, across Southeast Asia. And one of these success stories is Erlanger University's work in Indonesia for the Betta burdigala, this tiny, beautiful, very red little betta species that lives in the acidic peat swamps there. And I urge you to go on the website. We don't really have time now to talk too much about it, but I urge you to go on the SHOAL website, shoalconservation.org, and read about it. But it's an ex situ population that's being bred and has been bred and reintroduced into these areas, and a sort of sanctuary area of the rainforest that's providing habitat for the Betta burdigala to thrive, despite the palm oil plantations that have kind of in recent history and currently really encroaching on its habitat. So that's a really good news story that I urge you to go and read.
And another really brilliant success story from India, where Mike and I were very fortunate to visit earlier this year, is working on the denizens barb, or the red line torpedo barb, and they are working to integrate community conservation efforts to safeguard these populations and create kind of river guardians across areas of their range to protect them from over collection, but also pollution and sort of domestic sources of pollution as well. So a lot of outreach, as well as sort of working out new areas of their range, and that's actually revealed that they're in more places than we initially thought. So there's some really exciting work happening with Zoo Outreach, one of our key SHOAL partners in India. Again, we've created a short film about this as well, and you can see that on our website and on our YouTube channel if you want to find out more. But there's some really lovely work happening with Zoo Outreach at the moment, and I recommend giving that a listen and a watch. So, as Mike said, we've worked extensively with ASAP, and we've worked with small grants over the last couple of years. And this slide is just to give you a sort of picture of the kind of on the ground feeling of the work that's happening. For the sake of time, I won't go into too much more detail, but do feel free to check out more sort of deep dives into those projects on our website.
Yeah, so what's the next steps for SHOAL? The blueprint highlights the strategy of mobilizing action, conservation action for 1,000 of the most threatened freshwater species by 2035. As we mentioned earlier, there's 200 so far on the sort of counter, on the ticker up to that 1,000. So it's already a fifth of the way through. And there's lots of momentum, there's lots of support. The SHOAL is ever growing. It's this sort of burgeoning network that hopefully some of you now will consider themselves part of it, or get in touch. If you work for an organization or initiative and you'd like to partner with SHOAL, please do get in touch. And we see the strategy was only released last year, so it's still early days in terms of this 10-year plan. And the first 3 or 4 years really it will be building the partnership further and securing funding, and the impact will depend on the growth of support and partners over time. We're expecting this progress to start fairly slowly and then increase in pace after 5 years, when we really expect the graph to tick up towards that 1,000. So yeah, as I say, please do get in touch and be part of this growing network and this growing momentum. And that's it. We want to leave a little bit of time, of course, for questions. So thank you for being a fantastic audience, and let's connect. Please get in touch over the website. You can find the monthly newsletter to subscribe to sign up to, and get all the news from the wider world of freshwater conservation and what SHOAL is up to as well. We're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn and Facebook and Blue Sky. Please do connect. And as I said, please do get in touch if you would like to work with SHOAL further. So thanks very much for listening. Thanks very much to Conservation Optimism for the opportunity. And hopefully now some people are burning with some questions that they're really keen to ask. And hopefully we've got a little bit of time now to answer them.
Thank you, Michael and Georgie, for this fantastic webinar. I can already see John's hands up. John, would you like to ask a question?
I've always got questions, but I can see questions in the Q&A. So maybe this is a big question, so I'll ask you to give a very quick answer to it, because there are questions in the chat as well. But freshwater conservation is almost unique. Most of the habitats we're dealing with, whether it's forest or whatever, are fragmented, and we're trying to build corridors to join them up. Freshwater habitats are by definition connected. They are networks of rivers, and it's a common resource that stretches over thousands of miles sometimes. So there are so many people using the river, and if you don't get all of those people involved, any one of them could screw it up for everybody else. How do you approach your river conservation, bearing in mind that it's a huge thing and everybody's using it?
That's a very good question. Thank you, John. Big question that needs a big answer, but we'll do our best. Georgie, do you want to try and take this, or shall I have a go?
Yeah, I mean, we can both chip in. You raise a really good point, and that connectivity is something that is both a blessing and a curse. There's been some really impactful work that our colleagues Mike and Nat have been working on in the Mekong, to map these migration pathways of some of these mega fish that are absolutely just mind-bogglingly big and beautiful in my eyes, even though I'm sure many people would say they've got a face only a mother could love. But what they're doing is they're working to map all of those migration routes and pick areas that have the highest overlap of migration pathways, to really work with fishers and communities in those areas. And of course, in some cases, there are so many multifaceted threats like dams and other, upstream sources of pollutants that without many, many millions, if not billions, you're really going to struggle. I don't want to shy away from the fact that sometimes it is so multifaceted and large scale that, we're still working out what to do. But we have found that with that project, that can be a really useful evidence base for then working on community scale management, where appropriate, where you've not got some upstream beast of a threat that's likely going to dismantle what you're doing. So there's a real argument for improved biological knowledge of migration pathways to support that sort of work, because we're finding increasingly that people and organisations are very inspired by that connectivity narrative. So there's a lot of work that we can do to build on that and raise awareness about that. So it's something not only that we're aware of as conservation practitioners and get excited about, but also the wider sphere of whether they're donors, whether they're communities, whether anyone. So that narrative, I think, is important. To answer your question, there isn't really a golden golden bullet, silver bullet. I can't remember the metaphor I'm trying to use.
I shouldn't have asked such a big question, but
yeah,
thank you for that.
It's a tough one. It's a really tough one, and there isn't a magic answer. But I think, doing what we can as always.
Rashu, do you want to grab a question or two from the chat?
Yeah, I'm also conscious about time, so I will quickly share about 2 questions. So there is one question from Tim. Can you give us some info on UK freshwater fish? What are the main ones in danger? What are the main causes? Habitat destruction, pollution, fishing. Are there any UK specific campaigns?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Michael, are you happy for me to take that?
Yeah, jump in.
Yeah, so there are some amazing organisations working in the UK on freshwater fish species, and part of the reason we've not really focused on that is because there is quite good capacity, and we've been focusing on areas to sort of get as many species bang for our buck, with areas that really need some capacity support on the ground. Some examples that come to mind are the Sustainable Eel Group. Eels have huge historical cultural importance in the UK, but are critically endangered, and trade is a big threat for them, of course. The Freshwater Biological Association, they're doing some brilliant work on Arctic char in Lake Windermere. I really recommend checking out their website and signing up to their newsletter, actually, because I often get really giddy when I see all of their work on what they're doing. Maybe that's just a me thing, a shared experience. But the Freshwater Biological Association are brilliant, and they're working on Arctic char. There's also, I'll pop it in the chat, but there's a really lovely news story from last week about the Vendace, which is a species native it's an ice age species and thriving in a Scottish loch now, which has been something that one of my friends has been talking about, wondering where on earth they've been all of these years. So that's recently been rediscovered as of a few weeks ago. So that's a really nice story. And there are, I can't actually remember the team who's working on that. I'm not actually sure. Our National Trust of Scotland are working on that. We've got about, I think, 19 shoal priority fishes from the UK. Many of them are the Sabalinus genus. I've never actually said that genus out loud, so apologies for any salmonoids sort of specialists in the chat who have heard me mispronounce that. But most of them are salmonids, and there's quite a few different species, more species than you might realise that are on the shoal priority list. And in terms of threats, there isn't sort of one singular beast. Obviously, for things like eels, trade is a big problem, but for lake species, pollution can be a big issue and warming can be a big issue, especially in those northern Arctic regions, or not Arctic, but subarctic species or specialists that are at the sort of edge of their range in the UK.
Thanks, Georgie. There is one more question before I hand over this to Holly. There is one question from Fiona. I would also like information on the fisheries situation in Africa.
Oh wow, okay. That's Africa is so it's so broad. I honestly don't really know where to start with that, because there are so many different small scale fisheries, and one of the biggest sort of questions that we still have is trying to actually work out about information of fisheries in Africa, because these inland fisheries are generally not recorded. People aren't always able to provide that information, or they're not comfortable providing the information, or there may not be specialists working on it in the field. Tim has his hand up. I think there's a really great report I can signpost you to, and the Forgotten Fishes report that Mike mentioned from WWF. They've just released one that's specifically for Africa. So in the time it would take me to describe that and probably do a subpar job, I would really recommend checking out that report, and that will give you lots of insight. I can link that in the chat as well, so you don't have to find it.
Tim, would you like to say something? I can see your hands up.
Yes, just very, very quickly and this has been a super interesting presentation from my point of view. What is your view on farmed fishing, diverting the eating of fish to the farmed varieties and leaving the natural fish where they are?
That's a brilliant question, and a highly nuanced answer that's required. Of course, there is a natural cap on how much we can harvest from the natural environment. And with my background in marine fisheries, I've certainly been disturbed by fisheries collapse. However, I'm sure if you're asking that question, you're aware of the complexities of farming and the environmental impacts it has. For obviously, like, salmon farming is hugely contentious in the UK for that reason, because of nitrogen offloading and waste, as well as escapees and parasites and the recruitment of wrasse from the southwest of the UK and transport. I could list so many. But for freshwater, so many people's livelihoods that we work with are really dependent on aquaculture as a means of sustaining themselves and their families. And it can be a very productive and environmentally conscious way to create food, especially for inland fisheries, where those pools are being dug away from sources where the potential invasives could escape. However, it's a whole can of worms, and I think that there are examples where it has been done well, and for many people it's been a tradition for thousands of years, and those kinds of examples are ones that we can learn from. However, it's something that we need to tread carefully with, and I don't think SHOAL has a specific stance, because it's very case by case with a lot of these things. They're very very nuanced, complex. And I just on a personal note, not speaking for SHOAL, but I feel conflicted about them, and I do feel that they have answers, but they also have problems. So it's something that I'm really fascinated by, and as a science, I think there's lots that we can do to improve how we do it environmentally, sort of consciously, and for many they've been doing that for thousands of years, and maybe we need to catch up. So I hope that answers your question. I know it's a bit wishy-washy, but it's sort of a product of the complexity of aquaculture in and of itself.
Georgie, thank you so much. I'm keeping an eye on the time, and we've probably overrun as much as anybody will allow us to do so. People who, there's more questions in the chat. Can we make a note of those questions and pass them to you, Georgie? And maybe you could scribble down some answers and we'll put them up when we put the video up of the webinar. That would be lovely if you can.
Yeah, brilliant.
That'd be fantastic. Holly, do you want to wrap us up?
Yes, I will very quickly wrap us up. As John said, we appreciate we've gone over time a little bit today, but I'd like to thank you, Georgie and Michael, so much for such a fantastic webinar today, and to everyone here that has joined us, and also for your questions in the chat as well. As we mentioned at the start, we are recording this webinar, and it will be available across our YouTube channel and our website very soon. We'd also really like to hear what you thought about today's webinar. So Reshu has added a link into the chat to a short survey. So if you have the time, we'd appreciate any of your feedback. But that's all from us today. Thank you everyone again, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you, everyone.